Over 100 Air Force, Army and naval officers were arrested in Nigeria in the early hours of December 17, 1985 for allegedly plotting to overthrow the 4-month-old government of Major General Ibrahim Babangida, who had seized power in a palace coup against Major General Buhari on August 27, 1985. The arrest went on for the next 2 weeks. Selected cases were submitted to court-martial after a preliminary special investigation panel chaired by Brigadier Sani Sami and the Special Military Tribunal began hearings on Monday, January 27, 1986 at the Brigade of Guards headquarters at Victoria Island, Lagos. Major General D.Y. Bali, then Minister of Defense and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, convened the tribunal under the Treason and Other Offences Special Military Tribunal Decree No. 1 of 1986, which was based on Section 37, Subsection 2 of the Criminal Code. Brigadier Malami Nasarawa, Wing Commander J. Uku, and Lieutenant Peter Odoba were all tried separately on separate accusations. In a no-case submission, Squadron Leader Efaa and Wing Commander Ekanem were released and acquitted. The tribunal comprised Major General Charles B. Indiomu, Chairman, Brigadier Yerima Waikure, Commodore Murtala Nyako, Colonel Rufus Kukbolati, Group Captain Anthony Ikazobo, later replaced by Colonel Okbaleye when Lieutenant Colonel Bitinyong objected to his presence, Lieutenant Colonel D. Mohammed, and Alhaji Mamman Nasarawa, Commissioner of Police. There were two waiting members, namely Colonel E.B. Okbaleye until he replaced Ikazobo, and Lieutenant Colonel M.M. Bukar. The judge advocate was Major A. Kejawa. The prosecution team comprised Colonel Lawrence Owumaroge, Major N.N. Mazda, Major B. Makonju, and Captain Y.A. Hamadu. The trial was conducted under the watchful eyes of the Military Intelligence Directorate, headed at that time by Colonel Halilu Akilu. The following were accused: Major General Mamman Vatsa, Lieutenant Colonel Musa Bitinyong, Lieutenant Colonel Christian A. Oche, Lieutenant Colonel Michael A. Iyoshe, Lieutenant Colonel M. Effiong, Major D.I. Bamidele, Major D.E. West, Major J.O. Onyeke, Major Tobias G. Akwashiki, Captain G.I.L. Sese, Lieutenant K.G. Dakpa, Commodore A.A. Ogwiji, Wing Commander B.E.N. Ikele, Wing Commander Adamu C. Sakaba, Squadron Leader Martin Olufolorunsho Luther, Squadron Leader C. Ode, and Squadron Leader A. Haura. It was alleged that the plot was financed by General Vatsa using the cover of a family loan given to Lieutenant Colonel Musa Bitinyong. General Vatsa denied that the funds he gave to Bitinyong were intended for that purpose, but Bitinyong allegedly shared some of it for travel expenses with two other accused officers and was said to have promised to get more from the source when it became clear that funding a coup in Nigeria would require much more than the 10,000 naira he had given him. In 1985, it was estimated that a coup would cost between 50 and 100,000 naira to carry out. Vatsa, on the other hand, never met with or discussed coup plotting or finance with anyone else. Indeed, with the exception of Bitinyong, who had a close relationship with the general, the other alleged key conspirators never saw themselves as working for or on behalf of Vatsa, though two of them reluctantly agreed to use some of the farm money for miscellaneous expenses due to a lack of funds. According to sources, Vatsa insisted on using the funds for farming to the very end. Others claim Bitinyong implicated Vatsa after being tortured for 2 days by referring to confidential political conversations they had, which Vatsa denied. Vatsa was also accused of having bad blood with his friend and classmate Babangida that dated back to the Buhari administration and possibly before. He was also accused of implicitly disclosing Babangida's coup attempt to Buhari before he and Major General Tunde Diagbon departed the nation for pilgrimage in August. Later actions as a minister to expedite various military applications for certificates of occupancy for land in Abuja were interpreted as attempts to acquire support from one or two plotters. Then there were reports that he was introduced as Nigeria's next president by a civilian at a party. Of course, all of this is based on speculation. but they took him to the stake, which was quite an anticlimax to the career of a brilliant man who, until then, if the government is to be believed, never took part in any coup in Nigeria. Indeed, Mamman Vatsa was the first to go on air in Calabar to denounce the Dimka coup and was later the secretary of the Obada panel that tried Dimka and others in 1976. This little detail may have earned him some hidden hatred in certain circles within the army, which later contributed to his death. Now, let us examine the history of the so-called Vatsa plots. When General Vatsa returned from Mecca in August 1985, he met with Lieutenant Colonel Musa Bitin-Young in Lagos to discuss the overthrow of Buhari. In September 1985, Bitin-Young sent for Lieutenant Colonel Iyoshe to come down from Kaduna. Later, Iyoshe was accused but acquitted for acting as an innocent go-between. Bitin-Young then provided Iyoshe with documentation claiming major acts of wrongdoing involving army and defense equipment maintenance contracts against some characters in the new regime. The generally unflappable Iyoshe became outraged because he was a puritanical, very professional, and highly moralistic officer. In October, he discussed the matter further with Lieutenant Colonel Oche of Military Intelligence, who purportedly reviewed more supposedly incriminating documents relating to trafficking, particularly as it related to the release of some people jailed by the Buhari regime. Concerns arose regarding the new regime's long-term threat to the military as a disciplined professional fighting force and the country as a whole, owing to the legitimization of recurrent coup involving the same people. It was believed Nigeria deserved better and the armed forces should be protected from corruption and professional deterioration. This basic concern for professional ethos was amplified by concerns that the new regime intended to take the IMF loan and plunge the country into poverty. Certain Air Force officers such as Martin Luther and Ben Ekele were approached and 2 meetings were held as a result of concerns that the Army's armored corps was packed with officers loyal to the new Babangida regime. In late November 1985, Luther, Oche, Ogwiji, and Bitin-Young met with Iyoshe, Ekele, Sakaba, and Bamidele at the Sheraton Hotel lobby in Lagos and at a guest house in Makurdi. Apart from that, Iyoshe and Bitin-Young were supposed to have met a few times in Lagos or Kaduna, but no additional meetings involving others are said to have taken place. Ogwiji, a naval officer, was invited to the Sheraton meeting by his friend Oche without his knowledge. The Navy, on the other hand, had no operational function defined or planned. The discussion, according to reports, was centered on political criticisms of the regime. Despite the possibility of a seditious plot, no practical coup plans were explored. Ogwiji didn't communicate with anyone else after that. At the Makurdi meeting, the potential role of the Air Force was discussed. The technical limitations preventing the use of either the MiG-21 or the Sepekat Jaguar in a ground attack role to neutralize pro-regime armored vehicles at the Ikeja cantonment in Lagos were made clear by Ben Ekele and supported by Adamu Sakaba, who advised the army boys that the Air Force could not play any useful role. This discussion was, however, taken out of context, and the public was told that the conspirators planned to destroy Lagos. Sakaba, who had apparently been invited by his friend Ekele, even floated a wholly fictitious competing coup plot using the identities of a group of officers to which he claimed to belong as a decoy to dissuade the others in the group from proceeding before the meeting finished. Aside from that, it was clear that the group did not have troops on the ground in Lagos, though Iyoshe could theoretically employ demonstration troops at the Command and Staff College in Jaji. As a result, the meeting ended without a specific operational plan or consent to employ force, while certain key members, particularly Iyoshe, Bitin-Young, and Oche, continued to monitor the national situation and study the so-called group of brigade commanders that Sakaba had mentioned. The army was rife with reports of several parties plotting coup at the moment. Everyone was keeping an eye on everyone else. The braggadocio and compensation of the boys who carried out the overthrow of Buhari on August 27, 1985 did not assist the morale of serious-minded officers. Separately, certain officers had their own private discussions. Wing Commander Uku, for example, potentially attractive on account of his command of the Alpha jet at Kainji, constantly refused to be dragged in and vehemently advocated against the Air Force participation. Because he did not report the attempt to recruit him, this good officer was eventually charged with and sentenced to prison for concealment. In other isolated conversations among some commanders in Lagos, ideas like diverting the presidential plane to a pre-arranged location by executive fleet pilots like Luther and Ahaura were proposed. In this situation, the commander-in-chief would be arrested and confronted with allegations, following which he would be asked to resign. However, no concrete plans were made. After a game of squash in Lagos, Uche allegedly met with Majors Akwashiki and Onyeke to discuss national concerns such as the IMF loan, maybe to assess their suitability for recruitment. He never acknowledged plotting a coup with either officer though. Despite this, Akwashiki was sentenced to death and had his sentence mitigated by the ruling council. Some allege he was punished for not knowing he was being recruited by those who felt he owed them a sensitive position as commander of the 6th Battalion, Bonny Camp, which he denied. A new regime pardoned him and allowed him to return to private life almost 10 years later. Uche allegedly informed his nephew, Peter Odoba, a young lieutenant in the Guards Brigade, of the existence of a plot, who then informed a colleague, then Lieutenant, later Major Al-Mustafa, then intelligence officer to the Chief of Army Staff. However, Uche's nephew was later accused of concealment and was recommended for dismissal and a lengthy prison sentence. The exact nature of the relationships between Iyoshe, Bamidele, West, and Effiong, all of whom were headquartered in the Kaduna Zaria area, is unclear. Iyoshe and Bamidele were both put to death. Effiong's death sentence was reduced to life in prison. The case of Bamidele revealed an interesting side issue: how an officer, Bamidele, reported a coup plot to his superior, Buhari, in 1983, only to be caught and charged with conspiring. Then, following a coup, he witnessed the same boss who had jailed him become Nigeria's new leader a few months later. 2 years later, the same officer, Bamidele, was shot for allegedly knowing about and engaging in another coup without informing his superiors. Eventually, Major General Mamman Vatsa, Lieutenant Colonel Musa Bitinyong, Lieutenant Colonel Christian A. Uche, Lieutenant Colonel Michael A. Iyoshe, Major D.I. Bamidele, Commodore A. A. Oguiji, Wing Commander B.E.N. Ekele, Wing Commander Adamu C. Sakaba, Squadron Leader Martin Olufolorunso Luther, and Squadron Leader A. Haura were executed on March 5, 1986. Why were Vatsa and the others executed? The soldier, poet, and poetry farmer, Major General Mamman Vatsa, a minority of Nukwe extraction from Niger State, northern Nigeria, was accused of masterminding the coup of 1985. General Babangida's coup against Buhari falls into the same category. It was sparked by a wave of animosity following the fall of General Buhari. It is inextricably linked to the same animosity between Generals Vatsa and Babangida, both from Niger State and from a mutual alma mater. Its conspirators were a diverse crew of minorities from various backgrounds who rallied under General Vatsa's charisma. Their eventual execution left justifiable incredulity and doubts in the nobility of the regime it wanted to destroy, having been imprisoned in the womb and tried in secret. It failed because it was tainted by a mole. The conspirators were not from the army's well-known cadre of professional coup merchants and artisans. Furthermore, by extensive patronage and populist rhetoric, General Babangida's dictatorship had established its tentacles on the national power network. This explains his audacity in carrying out General Vatsa's execution despite national and international outcries for mercy. General Babangida said he was personally grieved by the insinuation that he executed the plotters because they were largely Christians. The pressure to execute them arose from the plateau officers' axis. Their officers had been victims of the same military tradition and laws, that is, during the Dimka coup of 1976. Babangida, on the other hand, has since made additional comments detailing why they were executed. General Babangida justified the execution of General Vatsa and others in 1986 in an interview with these day newspapers shortly after he turned 60, saying that after Vatsa's coup was foiled, he realized his childhood friend and classmates planned the coup in line with a deep-seated personal rivalry dating back to their days as young officers. Babangida claimed that he and Vatsa had been tremendous competitors unintentionally, that as a young officer, everything he did, Vatsa did as well, and whatever Vatsa attained, he pursued as well. Babangida claimed Lieutenant General Theophilus Danjuma pointed this out to him in their military records. Ibrahim Babangida gave this rationalization to justify why he could not pardon Vatsa. He said that when he first heard his childhood friend was planning a coup, he decided to do nothing but monitor him. Babangida then instructed that Vatsa be arrested and detained so as not to allow him impede the investigation. However, the Minabon retired general said while he was watching the video of Vatsa's execution, he turned his eyes away when he saw him remove his watch and asked a soldier to give it to his wife. Babangida further said he couldn't continue watching. According to him, he couldn't retire or imprison Vatsa because he believed the army officer could still have planned a coup either in retirement or in prison, adding that Mamman Vatsa was very stubborn. The execution of Mamman Vatsa and others on March 5, 1986 marked the first time in Nigeria that the charge of conspiracy to commit treason was met with the death penalty. Until then, conspiracy has always been defined as a treasonable crime, rather than treason in independent Nigeria. Long prison sentences were handed down, notably in the cases of Chief Awolowo and others in 1962, 1963, and Buka Mandara in 1982. The act of planning or envisioning a coup was not considered the same as carrying it out, as was the case with Dimka and others in 1976. It's debatable if the conspiracy charges that led to Banjo, Ifeajuna, Alale, and Agbam's execution in Biafra in 1967 fall under this category. This legal issue, as well as related issues concerning the protection of rights of persons facing military court-martial as protected by the ultimate Nigerian constitution, must be clarified. There have been far too many injustices thrown under the rug. Aside from the officers who were executed and imprisoned, many others were unjustly retired or dismissed, some for simply being neighbors of those who were convicted, and others for being too serious. Others had their names plastered across Nigerian television screens as suspects in a pre-coup trial propaganda frenzy, only to have their innocence later proven behind closed doors. The campaign to eliminate the most principled members of the officer corps was unrelenting, but it never really succeeded. Nigerian society suffered significant financial and human resource losses. Many of the commanders who were executed were of the highest military grade, had undergone years of intensive training, and were regarded as role models for professional military performance. It was a national tragedy similar to the C-130 disaster a few years later. Some military services were rendered useless to add to the environment of distrust between the dictatorship and the core military. Those executions, for example, were the beginning of the methodical elimination of the Air Force. Arming and training were severely hampered. Even the most basic commodities, such as jet fuel deliveries to Air Force bases, were tracked and centralized. The Air Force did not have a chance to rebuild and reprofessionalize until civil rule was established 13 years later in 1999. What little real professional engagement there was took place in the context of operations in Liberia and Sierra Leone. Officers in the army became increasingly wary of one another, eroding esprit de corps. just as the military was beginning to emerge from the terrible events of the late 60s and the hiccup of 1976. The word of the day was settlement. The darkest worries of Lieutenant Colonel Mike Iyoshe were realized. Former Army Chief General Saliu Ibrahim, who was first a suspect in the flurry of arrests back in 1985 when he was head of the Army faculty at Jaji, subsequently caught the degradation in public comments. The ruling's justification for the executions, notwithstanding clemency positions, is naive. For example, former President of Côte d'Ivoire, Félix Houphouët-Boigny, never executed anyone for plotting a coup against him. The Babangida dictatorship may have believed that the executions sent a message to future conspirators and would deter coup and secure the project, but it did not. As a matter of fact, a very violent attempt took place in April 1990, and the spokesman for that effort, Gideon Orkar, cited the executions of Vatsa and others in 1986 as one of several reasons for carrying out their coup. You can check out the full story on that coup in our next video.